Israel expects to wrap up its full-scale military operations in Gaza in another 2 months or so. Reuters reported, quoting 4 unnamed officials, 2 of them from Israel, and 2 regional officials who were involved in negotiations between Israel and Hamas. Military chiefs believe that they can significantly damage Hamas's remaining capabilities in that time period between the next 6 to 8 weeks. After the next 2 months of active operation, officials are hoping to pave the way to shift to a more lower intensity phase of this war. It will only involve targeted airstrikes and special forces operations. There will be no more ground operations, the kind of which we have seen from the 8th of October. There is little chance that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government will heed to the international criticism to call off a planned ground assault on Rafah. Rafah is the last bastion of Hamas control, and Israel believes that there are battalions in Rafah which Israel wants to dismantle if it has to achieve its goal in this war. And Netanyahu has said this multiple times in the last few weeks, that his stated objective in this war is the complete destruction of Hamas. He's also gone on to say that until Hamas is destroyed in Rafah, this war will not end. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said last week that Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, were planning operations in Rafah to target Hamas fighters, command centers, as well as tunnels that are located in the southern city. But the minister gave no timeline for when the Rafah campaign would begin or even end. He stressed that extraordinary measures were being taken to avoid civilian casualties. There were 24 regional battalions in Gaza, and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, claimed that 18 of them have been dismantled. He said this at a news media briefing on Friday. Now he says Rafah is the next Hamas center of gravity. Trapped between Israel and Hamas are more than 1 million Palestinian civilians who are crammed into Rafah on the southern border with Egypt. In the past week of hectic diplomatic tensions between Washington and Tel Aviv, US President Joe Biden telephoned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at least twice. He warned him against launching a military operation in Rafah without a credible plan to ensure the safety of civilians. Netanyahu himself has said that civilians will be allowed to leave the battle zone before the offensive on Rafah begins. But he did not elaborate where they will be taken to. Neither has the IDF explained in detail how it expects to move more than 1 million people within the ruins of the enclave. According to one Israeli security source and an international aid official, both of whom spoke to Reuters, Gazans could be screened to weed out any potential Hamas fighters before all of them are sent northwards. A separate Israeli source said that Israel could also build a new floating jetty just north of Rafah to enable international aid as well as medical ships to arrive by sea. An Israeli defense official said that Palestinians will not be allowed to return to the north en masse. There might be some kind of temporary accommodation, some kind of tent city, if you will, on the outskirts of Rafah. It wouldn't be safe or wise to move a large swathe of the population into a northern zone which has no electricity, no running water, and most importantly, which has not been fully cleared of unexplored landmines. Washington is skeptical that Israel has made sufficient preparations for a secure civilian evacuation. Biden said on Friday he did not expect a massive Israeli ground invasion to happen in Rafah anytime soon. Hamas triggered the conflict on the 7th of October last year when its terrorists burst out of the Gaza Strip into southern Israel. The attacks killed over 1,200 Israeli citizens, and Hamas also seized more than 240 hostages. The surprise attack prompted a massive retaliatory bombardment and ground invasion by Israel that has killed more than 28,000 Palestinians. Much of Gaza has been reduced to rubble. Fighting continues in the southern city of Khan Yunis. Much of the fighting is now concentrated in the south of Gaza, while combing and clearing ground operations are happening in the north. Egypt has sealed off its border to the Gaza Strip. Cairo has framed its opposition to the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza as part of a wider Arab rejection of the repeat of any Nakba. The Nakba happened back in 1948 when 700,000 Palestinians fled from their homes, and that accompanied the creation of the Jewish state of Israel. No Arab country wants a repeat of the Nakba of 1948. There were even unconfirmed reports earlier last week that Egypt was building a wall at the southern border with Rafah in a bid to dissuade Gazans from fleeing into Egypt. This month, after weeks of negotiations, Hamas proposed a ceasefire of 4.5 months, during which it said it would free all Israeli hostages. In return, Israel would have to withdraw its troops from Gaza, and an agreement would also be reached on how to end the war. Netanyahu rejected that offer as delusional. A new round of talks involving America, Egypt, Israel, and Qatar on a truce ended without any kind of breakthrough in Cairo last week. Senior American officials see that securing a deal to release the remaining hostages in exchange for an extended ceasefire in the conflict, according to them, is the best path to a reconciliation. Yet, there are very big concerns that such a deal may not materialize in the coming weeks, not in the least because Netanyahu doesn't seem keen. The concern among American and European officials is this, that the Israel war will continue well into the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which begins in March and concludes in April. If that were to happen, it could intensify global criticism of Israel's campaign. Which is why Israeli military leaders too are keen to wrap up the active on-ground operations, the first phase of this war, before the start of Ramadan in early March. Whether or not that will happen, that is something that Israeli officials are not willing to hazard a guess just yet. But once the war concludes, once the active ground operations conclude in the next 2 months, as some officials hope it would, any attempt to form a post-war government in Gaza will only succeed if it has some role for Hamas in it. Israel has vowed to wipe out Hamas entirely, and the group's leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, has said that he would rather fight to death than surrender or go into exile. Israel also remains opposed to any deal involving a permanent ceasefire or a separate Palestinian state, despite mountain loads of US and international pressure. There's also huge outcry over the disproportionate civilian suffering in Israel's response to what happened on the 7th of October. Since October, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has made 5 visits to the region. Last month, the State Department said that Washington was actively pursuing the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. In response, over the weekend, the Israeli cabinet passed a token resolution declaring that any unilateral creation of a Palestinian state would be deemed illegal as per international law. But it boils down to one thing and one thing only: whether Netanyahu feels comfortable to end this war, at least the active operations part of this ground war, in the next 2 months and declare some sort of victory. That victory can only be declared if he can show to the Israeli people, more than to the international community, that he has eliminated the known leadership of Hamas. Until that happens, it is difficult to hazard a guess on how long this war will continue.